Harry Fonseca came to the gallery shortly after David Bradley. He came from Sacramento originally, and he was of Maidu, Portuguese, and Hawaiian descent. He had a wonderful way of mixing cultures. It was part of that movement where pan-Indian objects and images were starting to happen. In other words, borrowing from multiple tribal origins rather than just strictly depicting the cultural stories of one's own tribe. In this case, what Harry Fonseca is doing, he's taking the trickster image of his Maidu heritage, which is the trickster image in the coyote form, is in many different Native American tribes. But what he does is mix them all together and then updates them. So you see his striped legs, that's as if he is a Koshari figure from Pueblo culture. But the coyote itself is also from the Maidu culture. Together, he includes different regalia and symbols of many different Native American tribes. But notice what he does in a very humorous nod to contemporary culture. Coyote is wearing high-top sneakers. Coyote in this painting is also an artist. Notice his palette as he paints the pictographs. Elaine Horwich started her first gallery in 1973, so many of her early artists came from Arizona. She opened in Scottsdale on Marshall Way, which at the time was almost a barren street. At one point, the street next door was dirt. But she started to open her gallery along with Agnese Udinati, and little by little, galleries started coming to the street, supplanting Main Street as the contemporary art street to go on. One of the first people that she carried in the late 70s was Suzanne Klotz. And Suzanne Klotz came originally from Kansas, and then for a short time spent time in California before coming to Arizona. And she loved it. She loved the desert, she loved the wide open spaces, and most importantly, like many of the artists who came from bigger cities, they loved the freedom to do and paint and sculpt in any way that suited them, rather than the strictures of what was happening in New York. With Suzanne Klotz, she blended cultures of Native American life along with her new suburban life in Arizona. This is very typical of many of the artists that Elaine was attracted to. They took images of Native American life, and usually the more kitschy aspect of it, and made it into a humorous twist. Not to denigrate the cultures themselves, but to have a playful look at the people who are collecting Native American art. So more from the kitsch souvenir aspect rather than a critique of the culture itself. In this case, you're seeing a strange beast-like figure, a stick figure, if you will, who is really a kachina figure, but dancing on a pedestal amongst all kinds of pottery and drums and other images of Native American design. One of the biggest things that Suzanne Klotz did in the early years when she was with Elaine Horwich is she had a massive solo installation at the Phoenix Art Museum. She was one of the largest attended exhibitions that the Phoenix Art Museum ever had, especially for a woman, but in particular for that time period. The 1970s was a time of multiculturalism. It was widely accepted and almost encouraged to appropriate from other cultures as a way to honor them. And in the case of Suzanne Klotz, that's exactly what she was doing. Meryl Mahaffey came to Arizona in the late 1960s to go to graduate school at Arizona State University. He was one of the early artists at the Art Wagon Gallery. And for a while, he stayed with Suzanne Brown when she branched off on her own and split with Elaine Horwich. But it didn't last long before everybody knew that the Happening Gallery was Elaine Horwich Galleries, and he soon moved over to her. There was a lot of back and forth between the artists till they settled in to the perfect fit for them. Meryl Mahaffey started out doing very minimalist paintings of striations of landscapes. So you saw a slight reference to mountains or to a landscape, but it was very much reduced to just single stripes of color. But later on, he started to work with the notion of photorealism. Using photography as his source, he must have gone down the Colorado River 30 or more times throughout his career. And he would bring those photographs back and work in the studio to create these amazing works that, when up close, they looked very abstract with lots of texture. But the farther away you get from the piece, the more you see the sharp realism inherent in the work. The way he worked was from a real place of knowing. He had hiked all those trails. He had been down the river many, many times. So his understanding was genuine, and his love of the Colorado River was so well known that even Governor Bruce Babbitt in his promotional posters used Meryl Mahaffey for his image. Susan Hertel was one of Elaine's favorite artists in Santa Fe. She had come from California, where for many years, since the 1950s, she had worked for the famous artist Millard Sheets, working on mural projects with him. When she and her husband moved to Cerrillos outside of Santa Fe, they had corrals and basically a small ranch so they could keep horses and goats and live a very pastoral life. Elaine was particularly drawn to her because they had similar things in common. They both came from wealthy families in Chicago. They both loved horseback riding, and they loved the peaceful life that one could have living surrounded in art. So Susan Hertel was one of her most regularly showing artists and one of Robert Redford's favorite artists to collect. So he was in quite a bit, much to the delight of the female gallery workers, including myself. She was a wonderful lady, and quite frankly, she was the last exhibition that Elaine Horwich attended before she passed away in 1991. Susan Hertel was known for a sort of Pierre Bonnard style of working, with lots of patterning in blankets and textiles in interior scenes, primarily with her lounging as if she's taking a nap in the afternoon. But she was also known for a very new way of looking at the subject of the landscape and equine subjects. So in this case, you're seeing horses as if you're about to brush a horse down or you're looking for something underneath the horse, a different perspective than the distance view that most Western artists were doing at that time. So she was looking at the bodies as if they were forms as part of an art historical composition. In the 1970s, as I mentioned, a lot of artists came from Arizona. And in particular, a lot of artists were recruited from Arizona State University. It was becoming a very popular art school at the time, and artists were coming from all over the country. John Dawson is one of those early artists, and he came to the gallery in the late 70s. John Dawson was a little bit of an enigma because many people were painting with Western subjects, but Dawson was inspired by Francis Bacon. He was also inspired by Philip Curtis, as you can kind of see from this reference to a Victorian house in the corner. He loved to paint portraits of other artists and of local gallerists and people that were important in the community. In this case, it's very interesting, he's chosen to paint Beth Ames Swartz, who's also an artist in the exhibition. And Beth also came to the Horwich Gallery in the late 1970s after having been with her at the Art Wagon. Beth Ames Swartz is seen here in a big, wide hat, and all you can see is just sort of a distorted, abstract version of her face. He wasn't trying to get photorealism or accurate depictions of people. It was more of the expressive inner qualities of the person. And you can see from the wild marks in the sky, he wasn't trying to seek anything but expression and a novel new way of approaching the figure. Anne Coe had a wry sense of humor, and she was an amazing artist in many ways. She had a large mane of red curly hair when she was in her youth, and oftentimes dressed, like many of us did, as cowgirls at the time. Here she is coming home from getting supplies to the fictional Mad Dog Ranch, and she's driving with her pet wolf, Virginia. And in fact, she did have a pet wolf named Virginia. I remember because we went hiking together many times in the 1980s. In this case, what's really interesting about the work is in the rear view mirror, you're seeing a coyote is leaping into the back of the truck to steal her supplies. And in the visor mirror, you're seeing a coyote going for some sausages. So this is, again, very typical of her wonderful sense of humor and that notion of wildlife infringing on the wonders and the benefits and the bounty of human civilization.